And welcome to episode number 8 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I am Zane.
And we had another big week. Zane, you especially had a big week making, 4 huge trades?
Yeah, I think so. Let me do the count. There's the Tatis deal, the Alvarez deal, the Berrios deal, and the Strasburg deal. Yep.
Wow, that's a lot. Let's skip over the Tatis deal for now, just because we're going to be talking about it in extensive detail with our special guest, Sahil. I guess we'll talk about the first trade that happened this week. It was one that I made just to kind of open the floodgates. I traded away Marcus Semien to Bo with the Flow in exchange for starting pitcher Tatis Thomas and a third-round pick in this year's draft. Yeah, and I guess since it's my trade, I can break it down.
Absolutely.
Last year at about this time, I bought high on Marcus Semien, and right now I'm selling low on Marcus Semien, and yet somehow I came out on top. I got more than I gave up, which is very weird. But I think I'm happy with this return. Marcus Semien, I was hoping I'd get these 2 trades done back to back, with the first trade being the one where I acquired Jean Segura. But in general, I think I prefer Segura to Semien where it stands now. And I think Tatis Thomas is a really promising prospect. Fantrax has him in their top 75, I believe. He's a very young pitcher with good stuff. And I think he's someone I'm lucky to have. And the third rounder this year, I wasn't super thrilled to take him on. I was looking for something to make up the value. And I'm sure I can find something with that third rounder. Now I've got 2 this year.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment there. Marcus Semien is really going to have to have a solid bounce back to be worthwhile to Jake and Clayton. They kind of need that extra production, so I understand why they would go for the gamble there. But they did have to pay a pretty decent price prospect wise because Tatis Thomas to me he was in our farm at one point, and I actually would have to look up what we traded him for last time, but he's a really solid guy. Oh God, we got ripped off in that deal because we traded Trident and Thomas for Kyle Freeland and Johnny Cueto, baby.
That is bad. And this is coming from someone who thinks Kyle Freeland's pretty good.
Yeah, that was a win now move, 1,000%. But I don't know. Just looking at his scouting report, I remember that the fastball was really what stuck out. He is super young, so there's a lot of variance there, but I think this is a win-win deal. Anthony's third this year should be able to garner something of some sort. And if not, I think there will be a decent prospect available there.
Yeah, we'll see. And when we have Yuki on in a couple of weeks, he can tell us exactly who that decent prospect will be.
Yeah, he does. I'm excited to hear from him on what he thinks about this draft.
So the next trade was one of Eric's. He sent Jorge Soler, Frankie Montas, and a second to Bo with the Flow in exchange for Teoscar Hernandez and Griffin Canning. What did you think of this deal? Because frankly, I didn't really think anything of it.
Yeah, I was feeling pretty lukewarm on this one, but here's what I think. Teoscar Hernandez feels like a pretty solid outfield bat. Going into next year, just assuming that he doesn't get hurt again. Griffin Canning, I don't really feel much about right now. Maybe Eric's special eye has seen something there that I'm not seeing. There's a good chance that he is, but I wasn't exactly blown away by Canning moving in this deal. Teoscar was my favorite player in this trade. Jorge Soler, we actually almost acquired this week, and it's hard to argue with his results in 2019, but before that, he was a huge disappointment. So I am a little worried about him as a dynasty asset, even given his he's 28, I think, or if not, he's going to be 28 next year. I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah, and Frankie Montas had that breakout 2019 first half before he got suspended. Was absolutely awful, garbage, abysmal for us after we traded Dominic Smith for him in another awful deal. With that said, Montas did end the season with a incredible 13 strikeout effort. So I think he might actually be the slightly higher upside pitcher here. I will admit, I don't know a ton about Canning. The 2022 second, it's going to be a late second, I imagine. It's your 2022 second. So I don't know. And actually, I should give a little more credit to Griffin Canning because his peripherals have been decent. He's posted so far in 146 innings a 4.36 ERA to match a 4.35 FIP. So in 28 starts, 2.1 more. I mean, it's not that good, but it's a back end fantasy pitcher, I'd say, or like number 4 like pitcher in a rotation in the big leagues. So I don't know. I actually think Montes is the higher upside guy from that, but I might trust Canning a bit more.
Yeah, I've never been a big fan of Montes to begin with. So I think in general, the team acquiring Teoscar Hernandez and Griffin Canning would win this deal, just because Teoscar Hernandez was really solid this year and Jorge Soler was not.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were the first 2 deals before the storm of deals that came from us the past few days. So I guess let's just jump right into probably the second biggest deal out of all of these, skipping over the Tatis Story deal. We sent Yordan Alvarez and Michael Brantley to both the Flow and brought back Blake Snell, Alex Verdugo, David Dahl, that 2022 second of yours cam that Jake and Clayton had just acquired, and Jake and Clayton's 2023 third, even though on the sheet it's written and Jake and it's 2023 third. I would love to hear your thoughts on this deal.
Yeah, so Yordan Alvarez is kind of, oddly enough, for a rookie phenom, he feels like a buy low guy, which is weird. But it feels like you kind of sold low on him. Michael Brantley seems to be kind of surprisingly putting up great numbers. I always overlook him. And then Alex Verdugo is another guy who's overlooked rather. He Boston fans were not excited to get him, but he's still very young. I believe he's 25, and he had a solid year. I think he's going to be a solid guy. I'd rather have 7 years of him than 1 year of Betts, assuming that those are the only 2 options. Blake Snell, obviously great. I'm worried about his ability to get quality starts since he did not pitch into the 6th inning once this year. And yeah, the picks are kind of meaningless, but overall, if I had to pick, I would say that Clayton and Jake got the better end of this deal just because Yordan Alvarez absolutely mashed in his rookie season. But it really depends on if he can stay healthy and if he can show what he did in 2019.
Yeah, I thought that's how you would side with that deal. On our end, what compelled me to make this deal was, first and foremost, I'm looking to get younger in any way I can. And this was a bit of a pivot because Steven Strasburg was our bullpenning ace before we acquired Blake Snell. And Blake Snell, although he does have the quality start issue, he is perfect for the strategy that we have where we are essentially punting quality starts and strikeouts in favor of ERA, whip, and the bullpen categories. So that pivot allowed us to make our bullpenning ace 4 years younger. The Alex Verdugo acquisition, he replaces Brantley on the roster. Verdugo is not going to be 25 until mid-May next season. So he is one of the youngest successful bats around the league at the moment. In his first 2 seasons, he has posted, albeit with some high BABIP marks, very respectable doubles numbers, decent power, and high, well, not high, but like really solid OBP. If this was an average league, he'd be even better, but I will take the 342 OBP in 2019 as a 23-year-old and a 367 on base as a 24-year-old. He feels like almost like a better fantasy version of Brantley moving forward, and he's 8 years younger. Now, the key in this deal, of course, is we did give up Yordan Alvarez. You phrased it as being a solo, but Sahil and I wish he was here to talk about this deal because him and I were kind of on the same boat after I made this deal. It feels like it has a chance of being a sell high too. I really, if Yordan Alvarez comes back and has that 2019 production, he is going to be an absolute home run pickup for Clayton and Jake in their second or first util spot moving forward. My concern is injuries in both of his legs, or both of his knees now, and he's going to be 24 next year, so he's really young. But I liked Verdugo as he's not going to be as high of an impact bat, but I think he's a safer bat with a lower range of outcomes, essentially. So having that plus Snell when Brantley was feeling like almost like a bit of an afterthought for me, felt like the right move. David Dahl is giving me that risk profile that Alvarez scared me with. Obviously, Dahl has not had the success that Yordan has had, but I still love his potential if he bounces back and finally has a healthy season. So he's just kind of the lottery ticket in there. The picks are not huge to me, but when I keep making those deals over and over again, I mean, you look now at right this moment, I think I have 20 picks between the 2021 and 2023 drafts, probably using most of the ones in the 21 draft to finish replenishing my farm system. But the 23 draft, those are picks that are a couple years from now. Some of them are pretty solid. So I imagine those will be good trade chips in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think they certainly could be. And I think this trade really 100% hinges on which version of Yordan Alvarez we see coming up. And it's one we won't really be able to judge who won for a little while.
Yes, I agree. I think that you will have a different opinion on who won this deal with the next one, as I sent Jose Berrios, Travis d'Arnaud, Keegan Aiken, and Connor's 2021 second to Connor for Bobby Witt Jr., Jose Leclerc, and Jonathan Scope, who got dropped an hour after I acquired him. What are your thoughts here, Cam?
Yeah, this is kind of an odd one. Travis d'Arnaud, I was kind of wishing I reached out on. I feel like I don't know what I think about this trade, and it's weird to see Connor trading away Bobby Witt Jr. for a starting pitcher and a catcher. Very weird. Didn't Connor? We mentioned last week that Connor had a weird catching issue, and now it's a little more clear that now he has Travis d'Arnaud as his guy going forward. But it's weird. I traded away Jose Berrios last offseason because I wasn't super confident in him. But Bobby Witt Jr., I don't know why Connor's trading him. He does kind of take away some of the risk, saying that if with the condition, which you can kind of discuss in a little bit greater detail. But I don't know what I think about this trade.
Yeah, I can talk to this deal a little bit. Jose Berrios, when I acquired him, I knew that either I would get somebody that I like more than Berrios in a trade shortly thereafter, because everybody in this league, regardless if Berrios is a 4 ERA guy, almost year in, year out, 360 to 4 ERA and FIP guaranteed. But he's 26 years old. So that's where I knew I would find value. So I took him on. I was considering for a minute building a rotation. Then I realized, I have 4 or 5 guys between Strasburg, Berrios, Snell, counting Matt Manning in, hopefully, and then acquiring 1 or 2 more arms in different deals I talked about. Then I said, no, I like the bullpenning plan. So I flipped him right immediately after. The Travis d'Arnaud going in this deal, I get that he's one of the better catchers in the league right this moment, but he's going to turn 32 before next season begins. He has had injury issues all throughout his career, and this was a sell high on him. I personally don't see the reason to hold 2 catchers on a fantasy roster for the most part, unless you have, d'Arnaud, that was the problem with him too. He got at least 1 day off a week, and that was killer at times. But Wilson Contreras, I am not going to be as worried about that with. So Berrios and d'Arnaud were the 2 main parts. The second didn't matter to me. I have so many picks, and I actually needed to get rid of a couple picks in this upcoming draft because I was overstocked. And Keegan Aiken was getting dropped at some point if I didn't send him out. So I would have done Berrios and Darno in the second, probably, for Witt Jr. alone. Connor had to keep his tab balanced over there too, his checkbook balanced with his roster. Scope was a drop to me, but he initially pitched the deal with Domingo Ramon as the pitcher, but I wanted a bullpen arm. He wasn't willing to give up Jordan Hicks as part of it, but without me adding more than I was comfortable with. But Jose Leclerc as a bounce back potential solid relief arm. Texas thought he was good enough to put a 5-year contract into him. That injury last year was rough, but I don't know, just felt like a solid ad there. But the whole thing for me was I thought that this was a win because Connor has the farm system where he can make a luxury purchase like this, and he needs the starting pitcher. So I think it's a win-win as he tries to build into playoff contention moving into the next year or two. But Bobby Witt Jr. to me was, I'm looking through his farm right now. I don't know if there's any guy in his farm that I would have wanted more than Bobby Witt Jr. If I was looking to build a young rotation, I would maybe say Pearson. Kirilloff I like a lot too. Forrest Whitley I think I inquired on at one point, but Bobby Witt Jr., if I'm being honest, was my favorite prospect on his entire farm. So to add him for Berrios when I wanted that roster space for a relief arm and was picking him up almost purely to deal him, felt like I succeeded in my mission.
Yeah, I would say so, especially if you're that high on Bobby Witt Jr. Having acquired Jose Berrios, you didn't have any sort of attachment to him, so well done to you to kind of get him. Yeah, your next trade you made later that day, you sent Strasburg a first rounder and a future second rounder in exchange for Rhys Hoskins. You already acquired just a week ago Paul Goldschmidt. Now you've got another top tier first baseman, sending away another starting pitcher to get him. What did you think of this deal?
I thought this deal was more clear than the Alvarez deal, in my opinion. Steven Strasburg is going to be, he's on the wrong side of 30. Yeah, he's turning 33 in the middle of next season. So he's starting to get towards the back end of his career. And obviously 2019 was a brilliant season for him, start to finish, including that 2019 World Series MVP award. But he missed the entire season with a nerve issue. I get nervous about nerve issues because, just as one example, I do believe Daniel Norris would be a different pitcher than he is today if he didn't have nerve issues in his early years with the Tigers that shut down his entire season at one point. So that concerned me. Ruthvik and Nick's 2021 first, I think number 10 is going to be, if I pull up my draft board, anywhere from a top 50 to top 75 prospect in my eyes. So that, or fantasy prospect. But again, I had 5 first round picks before I set this one out. So I had the room to make this deal. And for me, Rhys Hoskins plugs the greatest weakness in our roster before we acquired him, which was that first third base spot was going to be a platoon of Joey Votto, who can only reasonably be played in certain matchups, and Wilmer Flores, who was good for 50 games this year with extra base power, but is going to tank our OBP. Rhys Hoskins, healthy, 60 to 70 extra base hits combined. That's going to be huge. And that's the first base production that we need, or corner infield production that we need in that spot. The 2023 second doesn't really move the needle for me. Again, I have a lot of picks to draw from right now. Good on Jake and Clayton for taking advantage of that. But this felt like a win to me. I would call it a win-win if Strasburg has a good next couple of years, but I think the jury's out on his end in this deal a bit more than the other deal. And whereas the Alvarez deal, if Alvarez does well, then he clearly won it. Verdugo breaks out even more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like this deal for you as well. And just another ridiculous, formidable bat in your lineup. It's scary, let me tell you.
Yeah, now if you go down our roster, Wilson Contreras in the catcher slot feels like an upgrade over d'Arnaud to me. He's 28 years old. Paul Goldschmidt back in the first base spot is going to be an upgrade over. Oh God, I don't know. I think Joey Votto was the starting first baseman
Pretty much, I think.
during
Yeah.
that postseason run. DJ LeMahieu in the second base slot is going to be an upgrade over Merrifield if he plays anything like he has the past year or two. They're both similar age too. Tony Two Bags in the third base slot is probably our favorite player. Trevor Story at short, Trey at the middle infield, Reese in the corner infield, and then that entire outfield feels really good to me right now. Whether you view Verdugo or Yastrzemski as our fifth outfielder, doesn't really matter to me. But Mookie, Marte, Ozuna, and Blackman, there are a couple aging pieces with their Uncle Charlie's about to turn 35 next season, but it's going to be really fun offensive year for us, I'm feeling. Nelson Cruz for his last year or two in the utility spot. Sahil has been calling on him, trying to get him back, and I was like, this is the one chance in my life to have Nelson Cruz on my team. And after watching him destroy the 2011 Tigers, the 2014 Tigers, and the rebuilding Tigers, oh God, I would like to see him on my side for once.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I guess we can talk about the one final trade. It wasn't as big as some of the other ones, but with the Flow made another big trade. They made another trade. I wouldn't call it a big one. Hunter Dozier to Ruth Vic for Andrew Heaney. Andrew Heaney's one of the guys that Sahil hates unreasonably, right? Is that, unless I'm thinking of someone else?
So. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, I like him. And Hunter Dozier, was someone they picked up just a couple days prior. So being able to flip him for another starting pitcher, I like. Even if it's not the most flashy deal, it's one that could potentially, those are the guys that round out your roster.
Yes, and I remember I was busy when this deal snuck through, and Sahil messaged me saying Hunter Dozier wins this trade. Absolutely, right? And I was like, I don't know if I agree, but here's where I'm at. Andrew Heaney, the best availability, or the best ability, I gave it away. We all know the phrase, though. The best ability in fantasy baseball, in sports in general, is availability. And Andrew Heaney, from 2014 to 2020, he debuted in 2014, 29 innings. 2015, 105 innings. So it looks like he's starting to build up, but then 2016 and 2017 combines for 27.2 innings. And then one full season in 2018 with 180 innings. Fantasy viable enough, sure. 4.15 ERA, striking out 9 guys per 9 innings. I don't know what his quality start numbers looked like, but that's viable. But then 2019 and 2020 again, or he was healthy for 2020, but the 4.46 ERA was not quite what you'd want to see if you're starting him in fantasy. 379 FIP, I guess, is worth a low investment in. It's definitely buy low for buy low guy, but 2019 was another season where he was just not a factor in fantasy baseball, and that he was giving up almost 2 home runs per 9 innings. It doesn't matter if you're striking out over 10 guys per 9. That's Matt Boyd. So I understand the logic here. Hunter Dozier is a buy low guy as well, and had a stellar 2019 campaign. I guess not stellar, but 29 doubles and 26 homers. Most teams in this league will take that in their outfield spot. Absolutely. At least in one of them. But last year he was walking a ton, but 4 doubles and 6 home runs in 44 games. Even in the pandemic year, that's not many extra base hits, and that's why he fell to waivers, I imagine. But still, I think Dozier is worth a roster in this league. Heaney, if he's healthy, is worth a roster. So that almost feels like a wash for now. But if I had to be on one side, I would probably at this point side with Dozier being a bit more likely to bounce back than Heaney. But if Heaney's healthy, I think he wins the trade.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a fair assessment. And yeah, Heaney, health is a big concern for him, just like pretty much any pitcher, if we're being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that concludes all the trades from this week. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before our interview with Sahil?
I think I'm good. I do want to add that I did enjoy all the farm system controversy in our chat this week. So I'd like to shout out everybody that's been involved in all these talks about prospects. And Cam, I'm excited for you to get a chance to break down your rankings in a future podcast.
Oh, well, I'm going to be dropping something in very soon. In between the time we record and when this goes up, I'm going to be dropping something, doing the same thing but using a dynasty specific list, which I'm going to come out and say I hate this list. I hate this list so much. Noel V. Marte is the number 16 dynasty prospect.
Used Fantrax, didn't you?
Come on. What a joke. And it's just and they are so and every single player who got drafted this year gets like a huge bump.
Oh, yeah, they get huge bumps at Fantrax, that's for sure. And Noel V. Marte being over Adley Rutschman, I'm sure that pissed you off.
Absolute joke. It would piss me off even if I didn't own Adley Rutschman. What a joke. And then what else? There's just.
This list is going to put Eric just way higher than you'd ever see him get placed by Fangraphs or even Baseball America or.
And Jordan, I love Jordan Nwogu, but he is not a top 200 prospect. Let's be real here.
Yeah, and I get that it's tailored to fantasy, so certain ones are going to make sense. But if it's tailored to fantasy, then why is Drew Waters number 30 at Ruthvik? He would agree even. Ruthvik would say, yeah, man, Drew Waters is not a top 30 fantasy prospect.
God, I don't get it. And Eric's going to get a big boost on this, I'd say. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Just from having Wander and then Jason Dominguez 11 as compared to where any other reasonable ranking would have him. Yeah. But the Mets third round pick is a top 60 prospect, something like that. It's ridiculous.
Who are you talking about with that? Isaiah Green being 84.
Isaiah Green being 84. Yeah, come on.
One tick above Brian Hayes.
That is insane. Austin Wells, Yankees catcher. He was 28th overall at 66, right ahead of, and then Hunter Bishop at 67 is already busted. Why is he up there? Come on.
Yeah, and then they'll have to upgrade. They'll have to update their rankings too, because Nick Bitsko, I think, was top 100 on that list, and that was a stretch before, and now he's having surgery. Damn.
Yep, 97.
That's by far the highest I've seen him.
He's 4 spots ahead of AJ Puck.
God.
10 ahead of Hunter Green. Rough. This list is terrible, and I hate that I gave into the mob mentality to do it.
I'm so excited to see the reaction in chat.
Yeah, I'm manually editing it right now.
Okay. Dylan Dingler is 158. He was the Tigers' second round selection.
I know.
And Daniel Cabrera is higher than Dingler. And I think Dingler was at the beginning of the first round, but Daniel Cabrera was the Tigers' third pick in that draft.
Have I mentioned I hate this list?
Yes.
Unbelievable. And then there's Tanaj Thomas. Tristan McKenzie is 173rd. What?
That's rough.
Tristan McKenzie is behind. He's one behind Jairo Pomares. I've never heard of him.
That's a guy that Sahil would pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah. This list is probably responsible for why Sahil is able to keep picking up farm guys and flipping them. To be fair, I have done that before with this list. But now my farm is getting a bit too strong to be able to do that anymore. Nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, Reginald Preciado, 162, is a guy who Sahil somehow ended up with.
Oh, yeah, because I dropped him. He was in my farm for a little bit, but he's actually one of the guys that I would potentially want back just because I love the 17, 18-year-old prospects. It's just they are 1 year from now, he's either going to be, you'll never hear of him again, or he's Wander Franco, and there's no in between.
Yeah, pretty much. And when Jake Levine came on the show 2 weeks ago, he said that that's kind of been his strategy too, with the exception of his top guys.
Yeah, I have definitely seen that in his farm too. I definitely noticed that Jake and Clayton picked up Robert Poisson, and they have Maximo Acosta in there too, both just super young. I wouldn't be surprised if they take one of the youngest guys in this draft at number 10. It might look like a stretch at first, but if you take a guy like Christian Hernandez or Wilman Diaz, both really, really young, like probably 17, 16 at the time of the first year player draft, they're probably going to be like two of the ones that we're looking at. Like we look at Jason Dominguez getting taken late first last year. So I don't know. I'll just make that prediction now before we move on.
Yeah, I could see that. Jason Dominguez was kind of, I wouldn't call him a household name among baseball fans, but he was a household name among dynasty baseball players before the draft, and maybe one or two other, and maybe Robert Poisson was to a lesser extent as well. But it's interesting. I haven't heard too much about the international guys, and we'll see kind of how that happens this year.
Yeah, they might be a bit more under the radar this year. The signing period is not official until January, and you barely. This is like the least that you've heard about these guys in years from this signing class specifically. I mean, Cespedes, his little brothers in this class, and Pipeline's really high on him, but you don't really. He's not even like on the Fangraphs board yet because for whatever reason. Even though I do know that Eric Logenhagen, I think, has an 80 grade arm on Cespedes' brother, which doesn't help for fantasy, but you know.
Yeah, it's like Cespedes Sr.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be back with Sahil to talk about that big Tatis trade I know everyone wants to hear about.
Yeah.
There was something in the air that night. The stars were bright, Fernando. They were shining there for you and me, for liberty, Fernando. Though we never thought that we could.
All right, we're joined now by a very special guest, the usual host of the show, but he was kind enough to appear as a guest to talk about some of his big new moves in his offseason. Please welcome on Sahil. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Here in the middle of finals, but excited to talk about the big move I made this week.
And yeah, let's get right into that then. You traded, oh God, it was a big deal. You traded Trevor Story, Jose Berrios, your current first, Eric's current second, a very distant first in 2025, another 2025 pick, and then future first and seconds to Zane for Fernando Tatis and Giovanni Gallegos. I thought you already had Giovanni Gallegos. I guess you didn't.
You sent him to me, and then I sent him back.
God. And yeah, big trade already. And then there were a bunch of crazy conditions. You two were the ones who made the trade. Why don't you kind of explain the conditions and then talk about what you were thinking in making this deal?
Yeah, so the conditions are with the future picks, EBO will immediately acquire the next first-round pick that I get, and they'll get the next second-round pick that is in the top half of the round that I acquire. The first immediately goes to them. The second will go to them after the draft order is set, unless the EBO opts to take the second early to use it for like trade purposes or whatever, and they would surrender the top 18 protection. One of my favorite conditions is the MVP conditions. If Tatis wins an MVP in the next 5 seasons, I'll send an additional first and second round pick to EBO, and same deal if Story wins an MVP, they'll send me an additional first or second round pick. The future first and second must be sent to EBO by 2024. If not, EBO will acquire the next 2 firsts I have if they're still in the 2020s range. But if the firsts I have remaining are in the 2030s, they get my next 3 firsts. And the MVP conditions apply to each player for 5 years, excluding any postponed seasons due to pandemics or other national emergencies. So just really seasons where the MVP is awarded and being counted. So definitely one of the more creative trades. Definitely one of the best conditions deals that I've seen made, not only this offseason but as a whole. And just a crazy period of negotiations getting that deal done.
And yeah, it's a lot to unpack. How did the negotiations start?
I think the very origin of this happening was when I shot into the Dynasty Baseball channel that I am willing to potentially ship out another superstar. And, if I'm shopping a top bat, Sahil's going to be one of the first people to message. So he messaged, and he brought up a few bats. Who was the third? You brought up Tatis and Mookie. Who was the third?
Trey Turner, and I also mentioned Anthony Rendon.
Okay, yeah. So Sahil mentions these 4 bats. Right off the bat, I don't anticipate us ever trading Anthony Rendon, just because he's one of the 2 or 3 guys we actually still have on our roster, and Max and I are just so high on him. So I've looked next to Trey Turner, and Trey, I actually think might actually be a harder sell for us too, just because him and Rendon really are the 2 guys that I don't think that Max and I will agree with each other to send out. And then that leaves you with Mookie and Tatis. Mookie is my favorite player on our entire roster, and getting me to trade Mookie right now is at the same level as getting Anthony to trade Mike Trout. But Fernando Tatis Jr. was in that same category unless a very logical deal came up, essentially. So Sahil, I sent him a whole list of guys on his team from most to least interested of who I'd be compelled to do. He brings up Alonso and an additional guy and picks as the initial starting offer. It's not getting us there. But Trevor Story was number 2 on our list from his entire squad, Freddie Freeman being first. I would actually say that Story was probably my favorite dynasty asset from his entire squad. Maybe Yelich, but I've liked Story's 2-year production a little more most recently. So when Sahil introduced Story into the deal, things got interesting quickly. And I don't know, Sahil, where'd we go from there? I know you at one point, I think where things really turned the corner was Sahil said, what would be a deal that you just couldn't say no to?
Yeah, I feel like we were kind of beating around the bush and not really getting anywhere. And finally, I was just you know what, let's establish a baseline offer and then be able to work from there. And I mean, I could pull this up, and it was something like Story. Actually, I want to pull up the exact details because this offer was absolutely I was actually as soon as I saw Zane put that out, I was we will close a deal. I knew that because it wasn't too out of line for me to be oh, I really want to reject this.
Yeah, I know it was something I think there was 5 first-round selections and 6 second-round selections.
Here we go. I have it here. It was Story, my 2021 first, Eric's 2021 second, my 2025 first-round pick, 2 top 8 protected first-round picks that I'd acquire in trade, 2 additional future first-round picks that I'd acquire in trade, and 3 top 18 protected future seconds, and then the MVP conditions applied, and pretty much all the other conditions that we had in there. We whittled that number down a bit, and then I think I went to bed with the offer being Story, 5 firsts, and 4 seconds or something along those lines. And then I kind of realized, I was look, I've never owned a top 8 pick in this league. The price for me to go out and acquire one of those picks is probably going to be so cost prohibitive that I wouldn't have wanted to make this deal. So I was we need to figure out how to get those top 8 conditions out of there. I was that's just too much. And one of the things was if I didn't deliver those picks by 2024, they become top 5 or top 6 protected picks. And I was that would be even worse. So, I know EBO really wanted Berrios from the beginning, and eventually came down to they wouldn't make a deal without Berrios. So I was fine, let's include Berrios. he's a guy who's going to have an ERA that's in the high threes, strikeout rates there. He's never been that consistent. I do like the innings and the age, but I was like, whatever, I'm willing to give him up. So then we obviously whittled down the picks after that, and it was Story, Berrios, and all the other picks that, we saw when we started this discussion. And if I remember correctly, Max had a little more of a tight grip on Tatis than you did, Zane. And I know there's a little bit of an internal battle there, if you want to kind of get in on that.
Yeah, so Max brought up the great point, which was what kept me from even shopping him in the first place for the longest time, which was Tatis. Even if we're like looking at this deal and going, oh, this makes sense, the difficult part is, one, there are 3 players right now that are in this really young age bracket, 21 to 22 years old, that are like head and shoulders, I think, the main dynasty assets at the moment. Juan Soto, Ronald Acuna Jr., Fernando Tatis Jr. I think that you could see maybe like a Bo Bichette get into that category with another like really strong year. Wander Franco, if he breaks out when he comes to the majors. But right now there are those 3, and the gap we have Trevor Story as, I don't know, somewhere between our number 6 to 9 or 10 fantasy asset period right now. So we still viewed him as a top 10 guy. But the gap between number 3, because I like Soto and Acuna more than Tatis, and those guys felt pretty drastic. I guess I would put Trout and Betts in the conversation for the top 3 too, even though they are older. I just really like their production. I think the other thing was Max pointed out right now, leaving 2020, Fernando Tatis Jr. is the most fun player in baseball right now. I think Mookie is, but I thought we did have 1 and 2, the most exciting guys to like watch with the most, to put how Max would put it, swag in the league at the moment. But after a while, it was just like, okay, we're going to acquire from Sahil a replacement guy in Trevor Story that we might not notice the production change over the next 3 to 5 years, especially if he extends in Colorado. That is a bit of a risk we're playing on. Or if he goes somewhere else, hoping he has a LeMahieu-like transition, which is hard to bet on. But just thinking medium term, this doesn't change us that much. The Jose Berrios acquisition was big to us because we knew either it's a piece in rebuilding a rotation quickly, or it's a great trade piece in a pitcher-hungry league to immediately flip for something that no one would think that we could acquire for him. And then there's 4 first-round selections and 3 second-round selections once the next 2 picks are shipped. 2 of the seconds are middle round seconds. And then the condition, I think there's a real chance that Tatis wins an MVP in the next 5 years. So that would bring us up to what? Add another first and second? God. So it was just so many picks at that point, plus Berrios, plus the medium term not feeling like we're taking a loss there, that we were just compelled to take the offer. I understood Sahil's side too. You can't get a guy like Tatis in this league. Like, for the most part, that's almost practically impossible to do. Sahil's willing to deal his farm and his picks to improve his major league roster at all costs. And losing Berrios was, I mean, he has Eduardo Rodriguez finished 6th in Cy Young voting in 2019, taking the slot as like the number 10 starter in his rotation. Come on. So that's where we were. That's where Sahil was. Sahil, I know you're going to have more to comment about that for sure, but I think that's how it came to be like a win-win in our minds.
Yeah. I can weigh in a bit here too. Look, if you have a chance to acquire a top 3 asset who's going to be 22, you fucking make that deal. You find a way to make it work. And I mean, to Zane's credit, I think he was very willing to kind of be creative and constructing a deal with me, knowing that I maybe didn't have all of the assets that to give him immediately, which is why there's these future picks attached. But, you know, I was still able to give him a lot. I mean, I think from a pure value perspective, I probably overpaid a bit. But I think that that's just the price of acquiring someone like Tatis. And I'm going to pull up here the Zips projections for Tatis's age 22 to age 29 season are just absolutely insane. He is projected to have 60 career WAR through age 29. That would be third all time of primary shortstops behind A-Rod and Archie Vaughn. He is projected to have 5.9 or more WAR in each season from age 22 to 29. Only 4 players have done that in MLB history: Mickey Mantle, Tris Speaker, Eddie Collins, and Hank Aaron. All 4 of those are Hall of Famers. He's projected to have 30 home runs in each season from ages 22 to 29. Only 4 players have done that: Pujols, Rodriguez, Eddie Matthews, and Jimmy Fox. Those are all Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers. And these projections have him slated to hit for at least 124 RBIs in each season, beginning with 2021. No player has ever done that before. The most is 7 of 8 seasons by Jimmy Fox. And no player's had at least 20 homers and 20 stolen bases in each season from that age span. Tatis is projected not just to do 20-20, but 30-20. Only 1 player has had 8 such seasons for his career, regardless of age. Barry Bonds did it with 8. The next most was his father with 6. So all of that is to say, I think that I have acquired not only like a future Hall of Famer, but someone who's going to be an elite, very special top 3 player for at least the next decade, if not more. And I mean, I am just super excited to have Tatis on my roster. I think he's an absolute stud. He posted a 150 WRC plus last year and a 149 WRC plus this year. As good as Trevor Story has been, he's only topped out at a 128 WRC plus. I get that for fantasy calculations. You know, the WRC plus doesn't matter as much, but I think that proves that Tatis has a bit higher of a ceiling when it comes to the offense. And I'll say, I feel like Trevor Story and Fernando Tatis, I think Zane is right, have similar kind of ceilings right now in the short to medium term. But my concerns with Story were a couple things. One, he's a free agent after the season, and the road splits are just terrible compared to the home splits. And I know the Rockies already have Arenado down for a long-term deal. Maybe they end up trading him and getting some of his contract out, or maybe Arenado opts out. But I'm not 100% sure that Story stays there. And even if he does, he's going to be 28. I think it's realistic to expect some of the stolen base numbers to come down a bit. And I don't think that overall in the long term he has the ceiling that Tatis has. So while I think he's a nice player, he's going to, you know, definitely has a ceiling of a 35-25 guy, maybe even a season of 40-30 coming up with OBP kind of in the 340 to 360 range. I think Tatis could easily do that and then more. And I think Tatis has some room for growth where you could see him maybe even jump up to closer to the 400 OBP range. And I know like this year his walk rate went up 2.5 points and his strikeout rate went down more than I think like 6 points here. So I think that, you know, Tatis is just the better player. And I think like what Zane said, I think that there is a big gap between those top 3, you know, 21, 22-year-old Soto, Acuna, Tatis, and kind of the rest of that group. Even a Story, I think, is definitely a top 10 dynasty asset. I have him probably around that 6 to 8 range. And I think just talking a bit about the rest of what I gave up, Berrios is a guy I really like. He's a guy I'm going to miss. I actually almost reacquired him from EBO yesterday, and that deal fell apart at the last second. But I think that the peripherals aren't that great. You know, he's going to strike out a decent amount of guys. He'll throw for 190 to 200 innings. But, you know, if you're going to post a high 3 ERA and there's not much of a ceiling, and that's kind of the ceiling, that's a guy I'd love to have, especially at his age. He'll start the season at 26. I think he turns 27 in May. but he's not a guy that I'm looking at and I'm like, oh my God, like I really messed up giving him up. I didn't have a problem with giving him up if that meant I could close the deal and get someone like Tatis. And you all know how I am with the picks. You know, I feel like I could get prospects or other trade chips elsewhere. I don't really like gambling on these guys once they come up because I want to win now and I want to have sure things. So the picks didn't really matter to me. And realistically, only 2 of those picks are picks for the next like 4 years. The 2021 picks. The other picks I'm giving up are in 2025 or are going to be future first. I'll be giving up eventually. And I'll say with the MVP conditions, I kind of realized afterwards, I was like, it's probably more likely that Tatis wins an MVP in the next 5 years than Story does. But if Tatis wins an MVP, even multiple MVPs in the next 5 years, I don't give a crap what I'd have to give up to Zane to get that production. I'll happily ship off whatever picks I need to know that I have Tatis on my roster. So I think kind of bottom line to sum all that up, I think Tatis is a special player. I think he's a top 3 dynasty asset. He's 22 years old. I just like these players don't come in the market at all. Like in a normal dynasty league, and I know we are not a normal dynasty league by any stretch of the imagination, just looking at some of the players that have been dealt, not even just this offseason, but over the past year and overall, you know, when you have a chance to get one of those assets, you don't fuck up that opportunity. And I am so glad to have Tatis on my roster and this Tatis, Yelich, Freeman offensive core. So excited. And, you know, I think this is a win-win trade for both of us. As, you know, Zane mentioned, the insane amount of flexibility with like trade chips now with picks, and, you know, having Story and Berrios. I mean, he already turned Berrios into a top prospect and Bobby Witt and a deal that I thought was a win for him. And I know you all are going to talk about that. Or maybe you've talked about that already. Overall, I love this deal. Tatis is the best player I've acquired ever, and probably my favorite deal I've ever made in this league. And I've made 99 trades, so you know that's not something I say lightly.
Yeah, definitely. Like you were saying, if you can find a way to get a top 3 asset, you do what you can to get him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there were a ton of picks being traded in that deal, with the potential for there to be a ton more. And let's kind of use that to transition into the draft this year. You don't have any picks this year. You don't have any picks next year. You have one single 3rd rounder in the next 3 years. Is there any plan on adding picks? I know your stance on picks, but kind of in my mind, with your special voodoo powers, if you can turn that pick into a name, that could be extremely valuable to you. Like, say, let's use your 2026 first, for example. Instead of trading that away, I feel like you get a worse return trading the pick away than for using the pick to draft, say, Bobby Witt III, and then trading away Bobby Witt III. You'd probably get a better return for that just with your the way people seem to make trades with you. I don't know. Maybe it's not true.
Well, I think part of the problem is people have this expectation that even in 2025 or 2026, those picks are going to be late in the round. I know that was one of the things that Zane mentioned when we were talking about the inclusion of my 2025 first in the deal. So I appreciate that people are optimistic about how well I'm going to do long term, but you know, if those picks are not top 3 or top 5 in a round, I just don't think I'm getting that player that could easily be traded for. And I mean, we've seen some of these players get picked kind of towards the end of the first round, and it's a little more hit or miss what their value is. You know, you could be like Eric and, you know, pick Jason Dominguez 10th overall like he did last year, or you could be like Connor who picked Hunter Bishop 12th overall, and, you know, he doesn't have a ton of value, you know, right now. Or even looking at the draft the year before that, Victor Mesa was the 9th overall pick. He's not even on a roster anymore. His trade value is pretty minimal. Jarred Kelenic was picked 12th overall, and, you know, he's one of the top outfield prospects in baseball right now. So I think it's a crapshoot when you're picking that low. And if people have that assumption that that's where I'm going to be picking, you know, I think that I might just be better off trading the picks. And the reality is these picks are like 6 years away, right? So if the goal is to improve my team now and win now, if I can acquire a guy who I think will be in my roster for the next 5-6 years, then like, why not, you know, trade for that pick? and I'll figure out ways to acquire more picks and make some more moves. I'm very confident in my ability to make a trade to benefit my team, and kind of paper over holes and try to make a little or make a lot out of a little. So I'm not really, concerned about, being like, oh, I'm missing out on this great value, not being able to use my 2026 first round pick.
Makes sense. And yeah, let's use that to kind of transition. You said you're not really sure that far down the line what your team is going to look like. How long do you think the window is for your team as currently constructed? Do you think that you can remain good indefinitely? Do you think you'll ever have to resort to kind of taking a step back, maybe being like not a juggernaut for a year or two?
I think this is a good way to kind of transition into how I approach this offseason, because I think that, look, with the pandemic, with the 60-game season, with a lot of factors going on with these players with health issues or some of them getting COVID or kind of the mental toll that, the pandemic has taken on them. I think more so than any other year, it's very hard to evaluate players. So when I approached this offseason, I kind of went back to thinking, like, what are the things that I know to be true no matter what the season, no matter what the conditions? And there are 4 things. One of them was acquiring a top 3 22-year-old player is always a good idea. Getting younger, acquiring more depth, and creating a more flexible roster were the 3 things I knew that would be true. So I traded away a lot of my oldest players this offseason. Nelson Cruz is 40 years old. I shipped him off to EBO. Michael Brantley, 33 years old, shipped him off to EBO. Who else? I still have Carlos Carrasco, but Carrasco and Zach Britton are the only players on my roster that are older, that will be older than 31 on opening day. I acquired George Springer's 31, Max Muncy's turning 30 to replace Greinke. He was another guy, so Greinke was 37. I replaced it with Max Fried. Max Fried, I believe, is 26 years old. So 3 of my 4 oldest players got shipped out, and even Story was 28, and now I have a 21-year-old Tatis in his position. So I feel like I've built a young team that's going to be able to compete for multiple years. And I think that, once some of these guys get a little bit older, and I feel like maybe I'm reaching a point where their skills are going to decline, I'll just ship them out. So I feel like I could build a sustainable winner there. And I think that one of the things that's going to help with that too is depth. I learned this the hard way last year when Altuve, Ketel Marte, and Matt Chapman all went out at the same time, and I had to rely on guys like Chris Taylor and Rio Ruiz and Joey Wendell to kind of fill in. So I was like, I don't want a repeat of that. And I now have 16 bats on my roster, and I have backups at every position, including multiple backups at first, multiple backups at second. Obviously, short, I have Tatis and Correa. At third, I have Chapman, and Muncy's also eligible. Last year, I went into the season without any backups at shortstop and third base, and luckily, Story didn't get hurt, and I ended up acquiring Correa. But the Chapman one really hurt and bit me there. And then in the outfield, I have a lot of depth. Mancini coming back is going to be huge for that. He had a really great season in 2019. And even despite us adding a second util spot, I feel like I'll have the adequate depth, not only to get through the season, but to kind of hedge my bets against maybe some of these guys kind of declining or getting a little bit older and maybe things not ending up well. So I feel like I've done that pretty effectively. And flexibility is also something that's been an important priority for me. I had one player last year who was eligible at multiple positions. That was Ketel Marte, who was second in outfield eligibility, and that was really useful. But he's actually losing outfield eligibility this year. I suspect he might get it back, but for now, he'll enter the season with just second base eligibility. But getting Max Muncy, I think, is one of the more underrated moves for me. He'll be eligible at first, second, and third. He'll help me hedge my bets against Chapman coming back from injury, and Altuve and Ketel Marte coming back from down seasons, and to a lesser extent, Pete Alonso coming back from a little bit of a down sophomore year. And he'll, give me the ability to really plug in some holes, or he'll slot in nicely in that util spot. And I think that this flexibility, again, will give me some more options and really help me hedge my bets. So I think that's a long way to say it's a young team, a team with a lot of depth, and a team that I think not only can win now, but can compete for the years to come. And I think it's gotten a lot better this offseason.
Yeah, you've definitely made a lot of big changes already to your team that just won the championship.
Yep.
Hey, and sorry to interrupt, Cam, but before you get any more questions, that I do want to follow up on one quick thing that Sahil brought up. Sahil, you brought up how Marte, Altuve, and a couple other players gave you some issues in 2020. Are there any spots in your lineup that you feel a bit concerned about entering 2021?
Yeah, I will say that despite the fact that I won the championship, I feel like it was driven by a few bats in particular, Freeman, Story, Cruz, just to name a few. There are a lot of guys who had down years. And I kind of feel like I have to trust the track record and just assume that, 2020 was a lost year for some of these players and they're going to bounce back. In particular, Gary Sanchez concerns me a bit. I don't regret trading for him because I probably would have lost the semis round if Will Smith was in there instead of Gary Sanchez, just because Gary had 3 homers and 10 ribbies that week. Will Smith did not nearly match that production, but Gary had a really bad year. There's no sugarcoating that. I think Gary, I'm hoping the Yankees trade him this offseason because I think he just needs to change his scenery, but I do expect him to bounce back and still be a top 5 fantasy catcher. I'm not going to judge him too harshly on a 60-game span. When I think that he could still be very solid, and he's still young. There's still reasonable to think he's going to be a bounce back. I don't think he's ever going to be as good as like we predicted when he was the rookie of the year, but I still think he's a very solid option. But I am a bit concerned with him, and I've hedged my bets by having Alejandro Kirk in my farm system. And if you all look at his offensive numbers, they are insane. So I really like kind of the plan I have there. Altuve is a guy who kind of came on a bit in the playoffs. I like to think that it was a bit of a slump for him. I don't think he's ever going to return to that peak MVP form. He won the MVP in 2017. I drafted him with my first-round pick the year after in 2018. But I still think he could be a pretty solid contributor there at second base. Ketel Marte, he had the one great year, obviously, and didn't do as hot this year. I think a lot of that could be attributed to a wrist injury that they finally put him on the IL for towards the end of the season. And you know how that goes with wrist injuries. They really sap power to make it difficult to, hit. And I think that he'll bounce back a bit next year. Austin Meadows is a guy I've always been really high on. And he just had a garbage season this year. I know they platooned him a bit down the stretch, and maybe that's a little bit of a cause for concern, but they mostly just kept him out of the lineup against lefties, which means he'd be, still able to give me a healthy amount of at-bats, and with my depth, I could plug and play with the matchups. But also, he had COVID to start the season. He didn't really get a good ramp-up period. There was no minor league teams for him to rehab on. Then he had the oblique injury, and as you all know, those linger a bit. And there's no rehab assignment for him to recover from the oblique injury. Despite that, Kevin Cash still trusted him to bat in the top 4 of the lineup in pretty much every game he was in. I think he'll be fine next season. He's probably the guy I'm the most confident of that I've mentioned will bounce back. And Matt Chapman was hurt this year, and I think the injury affected him quite a bit. He'll have some surgery, and I think he'll come back next year and be stronger. I don't have a reason to believe that the production he put up this year is really the production that he's going to put up moving forward. I think he'll be more in line with his 2018 and 2019 production. The theme with all of those guys, or at least most of those guys, they're all 2019 All-Stars. I know Marte was. I know Meadows was. I know Gary Sanchez was. So these aren't guys who had one good season, and I'm like, are they going to bounce back? Or they showed a little bit of promise, and then they had the down year. These are guys who were established studs on their roster. So I'm reasonably confident with the full season, most of all of these guys are going to bounce back. I guess it's a long-winded way to answer your question, but I have some confidence. I have faith in my guys.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And we've talked about players you've added already, and we've talked about players you expect to bounce back. But let's talk about any other moves that you may still have coming in the pipeline? Is there anyone in particular that maybe you haven't reached out about yet that you plan on, or maybe that you like a lot and maybe plan on reaching out about?
Yeah, my goal is to add one more starting pitcher to this rotation. Whether I have to trade one of my existing guys, particularly I think Eduardo Rodriguez to get a deal done, I'd love to do that. There is one guy I've inquired on, and I'm reasonably confident that I can get a deal done there. I don't know if there's like one guy that I haven't really inquired on that I would love to get my hands on. But I will say, if I'm able to get my hands on this mystery starting pitcher, I would be very happy. And I think that would close up things for the rest of my offseason here. So I don't guess I guess I don't have a great answer to your question, but I'll say one of the things I'm looking for is perhaps acquiring some of these mystery prospects that are going to get dropped before the draft to clear space. I know teams like EBO and Eric have a lot of picks, and I'm sure that they're going to have some guys that they're going to want to drop. And I know that there's a few of those guys who interest me. So I think that's maybe where you might see my next move beyond this mystery starting pitcher. But I don't want to reveal the name of this mystery starting pitcher quite yet. Maybe this trade will drop before the podcast comes out, but this will be another example of the Yellow Champs being very aggressive and acquiring a guy that they really like that'll be a good long-term fit.
Keeping it under wraps. All right.
Sahil, it's a pleasure to make such a large deal with you, and it was a pleasure to talk about it on the podcast with you.
Absolutely. No, the timing worked out well with that. I will add one more thing before we leave. And this is a bit of a hot take, and maybe you all can discuss this a bit further. But I think that the gap between the top two teams in this league, i.e. me and Zane, and the other playoff teams, so you, Ruthvik, Eric, and Clayton and Jake was also someone else that I projected to be a playoff team. I think that gap has widened substantially this offseason. And that is my hot take. I wanted to leave you all with that.
That's hard to argue with. All right. Well, thank you, Sahil, and thank you, Zane, for graciously co-hosting with me these past 2 weeks. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. It's been fun.